wanted to just start off with asking whether you could briefly share like how you learned about your diagnosis of schizophrenia and maybe the events that led up to that.
Yeah, so to be honest, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in my 20s, but I don't even remember exactly when that diagnosis was made. I want to say it was in the 2000, it was after 2010 and before 2020 for sure. Somewhere in the middle of that time range, probably around 2015, 16. So I was about um uh 2000, if it was 2016, I would have been 30, but I was diagnosed before I was 30. So I was probably around 26 or 27 years old. And the diagnosis happened in a hospital by a psychiatrist. But what precipitated that hospitalization was I had moved to Florida on my own to live. And looking back, it wasn't the best idea because I just wanted the freedom of living on my own. And I was in my 20s, I was still young, and I didn't have much of a plan moving down there. I just wanted to live on my own and get away from life as I knew it up here in Massachusetts, where I had done college and worked after college. So after working in Boston for 4 years after college, I moved to Florida, and without a plan and without any purpose for being down there and knowing nobody, my mental state quickly deteriorated, and I was having a hard time functioning, and my roommates who I was living with noticed that I wasn't doing much during the day and just kind of being very like lacking purpose, no job, no contacts, no nothing, and isolating myself a lot. So I kind of had like a mental breakdown, and they called the police who came to check me out, and I hadn't done anything criminal, but they noticed that I wasn't really up to par with my mental state. So they took me to the hospital, and then that's when I had a formal diagnosis and really started my journey because that diagnosis made it very real. So that hospitalization was very pivotal. And I got out of that situation because my mom flew down to Florida and got me at the hospital and flew me back up to Massachusetts to live with her afterwards. So since I had actually been hospitalized before then too, but this was the hospitalization where I was diagnosed. And from then on, I was working with this diagnosis. So I had a label to my condition and my struggles, and worked with doctors up here um, to address it. And it wasn't the last time I was hospitalized. I actually came back to Massachusetts, and I got myself in a graduate program for pharmacy, my doctorate in PharmD, and I had to take a year off, 2 years into a 3-year program because I was kind of burning out. And during that year off, I was also hospitalized, hopefully for the last time. And that was at the end of 2018. And that's when, in that hospitalization, which was also very helpful, I got out of it, but the doctor there put me on a regimen of Haldol. So I take Haldol injections, and I have been ever since that date, but with decreasing dosage. And that regimen has been very, very helpful in getting me back on track and living a very productive life. So with that hospitalization, it was necessary at the time, but now that I'm on Haldol, I've graduated with my doctorate, and I've been working since 4 months after graduation at a local biotech company. So now I'm an engineer, and so I have the beginnings of a career, and things have straightened out. But it was definitely, hospitalizations aren't pleasant for sure, and they're not great, but sometimes when they're needed, and you work with the doctors and the team there, they really are trying to treat you for a problem that you have, a condition that you have. So it's best to work with the doctors, listen to them and have your input, and then work with them to have better outcomes.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And notice in the essay you penned that you mentioned some doctors labeled you as like gravely ill, and but
Yeah.
you continued to look for proper care until you found a doctor that took a chance on you. So we are wondering what your advice might be to finding the best doctor and building like a trusting relationship.
I have never sought out doctors. I've always seen the doctors who work at the various hospitals that I've been with. So to be honest, I've been hospitalized maybe half a dozen times, and I've been at hospitals where the care wasn't so great. And I fought with the doctors and I didn't like listening to their input and the, the medications they recommended. But it just so happened that the hospitalization that I mentioned, when I was at Terra Vista in Devens, Massachusetts. They had a really good psychiatrist there. He graduated from Yale and he was very qualified and very knowledgeable and experienced. And he just happened to be the right doctor to help me. So I've never actually actively looked for it. I've never gone out of my way with hospital doctors because you're admitted and you have to work with the team that's there. But I guess it was just lucky that the doctor that I saw there was spot on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so when you were like seeking treatment, were there any barriers that you initially experienced?
No barriers per se, but I think that, you know, you are, for lack of a better term, like a mental patient. So it's hard for them to take you seriously because they need to listen to your side of things, but they also understand that you're sick, right? And you're not thinking properly or optimally. So it's important to speak your side and to allow them to get to know you as a patient, and to be observed for days at a time so that they can understand your condition better and see how you think so that they're able to properly diagnose you.
Mhm.
I guess it would be a good time to ask we know that like there's a lot of preconceived notions about schizophrenia that kind of float around for like media representation and things like that.
Mhm.
Did you yourself experience having any of these like preconceived notions going into it? And what are some things that from your perspective people are getting wrong about schizophrenia?
That's a really good question. It's very also involved, I think, but it was hard for me to accept my diagnosis at first because I was still expressing myself. To me, I made sense. But having lived life since that diagnosis, I do think they made the right call at that point. Because since that diagnosis, like I did notice I had trouble functioning and my thoughts were kind of disordered. Like I never heard voices. I never heard voices, but I just did have trouble functioning. And for me, like everyone's diagnosis and how they live out the symptoms is different. But like I just had trouble functioning and I would shut down. Like my mind just didn't want to seem, it wasn't engaged in the development it's been. And I just kind of like really without the medication, I would just shut down and have a really hard time functioning. But I think like the media would have you think that like people hear voices. Sometimes that happens because I've been in groups where there are other patients with the same diagnosis and they say they hear voices. But it's different for everybody. And I think the media does a general job of portraying it, and it is a very severe diagnosis. So, anyone who has it, it shouldn't be taken lightly. And, they will probably have to go a long, long way, like I have to get on the road to recovery and get better. But I think that the media portrays it generally, maybe not accurately, but it's the media, so it's portrayed a certain way to like make it digestible to the common public. And I would just say, just know that everyone has a very unique experience with it, and it is a very serious condition. Like I have to emphasize that again. So I think the media's portrayal isn't entirely inaccurate, but it's just generalized to make it seem like it has a lot of taboo, and it's, they're completely crazy. I mean, to some extent, you aren't grounded in reality. You have a hard time dealing with reality, but there is a possibility for recovery. And if you are the right team and you take the time to work with these people, to see their humanity, it's easier for them to be understood, and then it gives them a greater chance of recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that was like incredibly striking in your essay as well was the emphasis on just getting better and emphasis on recovery over stigma and everything else. And so we're, curious about your perspective, having been on this journey, taking that perspective of recovery over all else. We're just wondering, how did that perspective, like maybe you or factor into the process of overcoming stigma and everything?
Yeah, I mean, not many people know about it. For example, right now, my company doesn't know about it. They don't need to, and it's kind of in the rearview mirror because it was a diagnosis made long ago, and I don't know if I'm actively schizophrenic now. I mean, I feel like I communicate just fine. So at the time, maybe it was appropriate, but like I'm lessening I just never saw myself as less of a person because I had this diagnosis. I was like, oh, thank you for informing me that I have this huge problem to work on. So I was determined to get better and to really address it and not be in denial about it. I think that helped as a first step. And then just really working on all areas of my life to get better. So that included patching up relationships with my parents, seeing them a different way, addressing the PTSD that I still kind of have, which was diagnosed, but I think I had PTSD from early childhood experiences that coincided with the diagnosis. So I'm still actually working through those symptoms, but I just never felt inferior to anyone else for having this diagnosis. And so I just worked with myself and worked on myself, graduated school. So I got the degree in the bag. And then I'm like, okay, I have the degree in the bag. Let's try to get a job that lines up with the degree you just finished. And, that happened. So it was step by step. It was like slow and steady, and I had the right relationships to help me to be supportive emotionally and just from an understanding perspective. So for example, like I have my partner right now is very supportive and very understanding and doesn't put pressure on me to be a certain way, but sees that I am, really trying to build up my life and make it productive. So he's very supportive, and he's always been very supportive. And then my mom has always been supportive in the sense of just being a mother who wants to see her child do as well as she possibly can. So she's always also been a very good support. So having supports, being honest with my doctors, and just speaking up, I'm not afraid to communicate and have my side of the story known, and to just have a working relationship, a professional working relationship with my team, as it were, because I know they're there to help me, and I don't see them as any sort of threat or any danger or anything like that, but to understand that they're really there for my best interest, with my best interest in mind. So it's a good thing. So I work with them, and Dr. Fan has been the team that I've had for many, many years. I had them even before my last hospitalization, and he's always been just a steady touch point at times to meet with, and to have resident psychiatrists work with me to, further my treatment.
Yeah, I think that's really important that you emphasize that social support network, having that there for you. And so we're wondering how impactful do you think having the support from loved ones like your partner or your parents was in your recovery? Do you think it was crucial in that aspect?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, I think I have to give my partner a lot of credit because I started kind of like living with him on the weekends. So I would spend my free time, the days at a time with him, and just seeing how he doesn't have any, mental diagnosis. So just seeing how he lives and how steady he is with activities, he's really shown me, step by step how to have like a basic regimen of activities in a normal life. Like we get up, we have a full breakfast, make eggs, pancakes, bacon, waffles, like toast, English muffins, whatever. Like there's just starting the day on the right foot, and then like going to sleep at this right time. Um, Basic personal hygiene. I mean, I was already knew about those things and I was taking care of them, but just like doing all those things with him all the time for years has really solidified those activities as like important cornerstones in your life to have a normal life and to keep the basic rhythm of life going. So he's been like really, really crucial for sure. And I just feel lucky that I met the right person, because he was patient with me in the beginning when I would be lazy to like get up for breakfast at the right time, or I didn't want to brush my teeth at night. And he really just emphasized like, you have to do these basic things to keep your life in order. And so, I started adopting his habits and go and living like he did. And it was really important to have that firsthand experience. But like when you have a diagnosis as chaotic and your mind is as disorganized as someone with schizophrenia, like it's important to see that and to have someone, be on you to hit those activities day in and day out so that you're regulated and you're more normal. So it's been really helpful to have someone like that in my life. And it's, like I said, now it is a part of my life too. So that makes the symptoms less, that makes getting along in life easier. But like, it just wasn't honed in to me as a child. Like I would do these things, but the shutting down part inhibited when these things needed to happen. So sometimes they would be delayed or sometimes they wouldn't happen. But having someone I felt safe with and could open up to, I was more able to open up and just live life with a normal routine.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think maybe as as you were receiving the diagnosis and kind of starting treatment and kind of adjusting your lifestyle to living with this diagnosis, were there any other outlets that you were engaging with to like maybe to cope with the diagnosis or to just kind of develop new lifestyle habits?
Not really. I mean, in the beginning, I was on different kinds of medication and they were working partially. They weren't that great because I would have side effects, and I would just try to get along as best as I could. At that point with the diagnosis, I hadn't started grad school yet. So I always had just life goals to continue my life with. I can't think of, for me, any other outlets, but like I would try to just do self-care activities. I would try to um, self-soothe and journal a little bit, if that could count as an outlet. So things like that. But like no external support groups or anything. I hadn't even seen a therapist since then. But just kind of relying on people I knew in my life. And of course, always the medical team.
Yeah. And speaking of therapy, I guess so you did return to therapy after receiving your diagnosis or starting treatment?
I actually never did. I had one in college, but I stopped working with them, and that was before the diagnosis. After the diagnosis, I actually never did. And I probably would have benefited, but it really just never materialized. And so I've been going without it, and I've considered having one, but without one, I'm okay. It's not like I can't function or anything. So it's just that I've decided not to have one for now.
Mm. Okay. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for like sharing everything that you have so far. I think now, kind of being in the position that you are in your personal recovery journey, what advice do you think you would give to someone who is maybe more in your position at the start of the journey, maybe someone who recognizes that they might have symptoms of a mental illness but isn't sure, or like doesn't know how to seek help?
Yeah, I would just I have a lot of advice to give them. I would say try to get to know yourself and just be accepting of your symptoms and how you are. And just try to understand how you're having a hard time with life, like how you're having a hard time functioning. If your mind is really disorganized, try to have strategies to make it more organized, like talk it out, journal, try to change your thoughts too on a very like basic level. You might have to almost work to rewire how your mind works. So understanding like subconscious thoughts, reprogramming your thoughts, stopping the self-sabotage, the negative self-talk, hating yourself, loathing yourself. Like you have to get out of that and think positively, and like doing real basic things in life, like getting up, showering, brushing your teeth, eating a good breakfast, like getting employed if you can in some capacity, like all of these basic things that keep everyone's lives going, like really try to get that for yourself and in place. It's not easy, but you really have to make it's kind of like mental and practical at the same time. So like with the mental, it's kind of like watching your thoughts and changing your mind so that you're able to execute and function better out in the external outside world. And then in the external outside world, you want to be productively engaged and interested in activities in life, and having a good support system and working with your doctor. But like, making sure you're not in denial is the first step, and then taking real small but important steps towards recovery, however that might look like.
Yeah, thank you for the advice. This next question is kind of a big one, so feel free to like offer as much or as little as you have. But something that was also really striking towards the end of your essay was about how there can be a lot of silence around this topic of mental health in the Asian community in particular, and that there are a lot of ways, like you mentioned in our conversation too, about reaching out to your medical provider, your team that you're working with to start the conversation. But do you have any thoughts, just based on your personal journey or personal opinions about how maybe like people in the Asian community could work on getting conversations started or opening spaces for talking more about these topics?
I mean, I think you already have a leeway into the solution. It is like more open dialogue, and seeing how, like having a culture that's traditionally focused on, downplaying yourself and minimizing the role of the individual, and addressing those cultural norms and how it might interplay with such a devastating diagnosis. And not having, there's already a lot of taboo around it and shame, but I think having been someone who was Asian and diagnosed with it, there could be even more on top of that. I don't think my mom really shamed me ever for having it. She just was like very concerned. And she's open enough to understand that I was having trouble and just always worked with me to try to get better. So that was definitely helpful. But, if you have like family silence around it, or people who will treat you differently and not be helpful for your recovery, then it makes it even harder. So I think you already know, and it's really an obvious but important undertaking is to have that conversation, those conversations, and to be more open with it and to just understand it more. Because I think I've always been my mind has always been very active. When it shuts down, actually, I know it's not working optimally, and it shuts down. It shuts down because of trauma that I've experienced within my family growing up. So it has the tendency to shut down. But I know that's like a response and not how it naturally is. It naturally wants to be open and engaged and involved. So, it's just more of letting like the light in and letting the good win over the bad or the darkness. And then having conversations about how you really feel. And maybe it means addressing how certain people are. Maybe it has to point out certain behaviors that are unacceptable that other people did that maybe led you to such a bad mental state. But it's, yeah, you have to be honest and open, and hopefully people will be receptive to that.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that was about all the questions we have for you. That was really insightful. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome.
Encouraging to hear, you know, how your whole journey and how you've made it to here, and you know, the support system you've had along the way too. It's very encouraging.
For sure. Yes.
Okay, well, I think, yeah, is there anything else that you would like to add to the conversation or bring up that we haven't touched on?
I don't know, like I just think like everyone's journey is unique. There are always unique individual circumstances that lead people to very poor mental states and outcomes. But you know, and everyone's recovery looks different. You know, I don't know if everyone is able to recover as much as I have. And I'm not saying I'm the best example of recovery, but there has been substantial progress in my mental state for sure. And, you know, reading up on it helps. Reading up on the professional literature. There's a lot of books about how to recover from a diagnosis like this. There's guidebooks for people assisting people, you know, with diagnoses like this. So there's a lot of literature out there already. And then you just have to find out like what works for yourself, and always, you know, be determined to do better for yourself, because you know, life is better when you have an organized mental state. Mental health is really, really important. And I didn't understand it as much growing up because it was just never emphasized as a concept. But now that I'm an adult, I really understand the concept. People talk about it all the time. And functioning in this world and having your life together, it is much better. It is much more enjoyable and much better when you know, have a job, you have friends, a few close friends, maybe, you know, you have a home environment that you really like going back to, just having basic things that every person should have in their life. And then you can really grow as an individual. So like, it's hard because I think a lot of people who have poor mental health actually are also have poor financial situations. So, and that's not talked about as much because, you know, it's hard to talk about it. A lot of people don't want to disclose that, but my mental health for sure has improved with my financial situation and being employed and making, you know, money for myself and being gainfully employed and being productive for a cause that I think is very worthwhile, because my company works on curing cancer. So I think it's just important to find how you can make a positive impact in the world, you know, make a living from it, or a few ways of making a living and, you know, improving your situation. But it's not easy to get that started, and you need opportunity. You need to have the right timing to get those kinds of opportunities in place and lined up for yourself. So it's not entirely, you know, a person's own doing that they're like that or they get to be like that. A lot of unfortunate things happen, but then a lot of fortunate things have to happen for them to get better. So just being sympathetic to the whole situation, like, you know, a person might have poor mental health, but their financial situation might be also terrible. And it's hard to have great mental health if you know you're going to struggle financially. So it's important to like address their physical needs, their financial situation, their relationships, the whole picture. And, you know, people just say, you know, work on your mental health, but really your mental health can be a product of all of these things in your life being in place. So, you know, I think everyone has an obligation to look after the mental health, but it really just means taking care of yourself and carving out the best possible life you can have for yourself and, shining and lending your light to the world. So.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's an amazing piece of advice too. I think, with how you said it too, with everyone having a different mental health journey, different factors affecting them, big um key thing too is just to have compassion for everyone in general because like as you said, everyone has different factors that are playing a role into their life that we might not know about. It's not as simple as like as I said, working on like mental health. It takes a lot of work. So I think that's an amazing piece of advice that you're offering there.
Yeah, and just, work on people's character. Like, it doesn't serve anyone to play the victim. Like, I've had a hard time, but I never really saw myself as a victim because I did have enough self-confidence and underlying assurance in myself that I knew I would get better. I mean, I was just super depressed because my parents were abusive at one point and this and that. So like, I know I have reasons for why I ended up that way. And I might have been predisposed, having parents that immigrated, if they weren't in the best situation, having me, I might have been predisposed to having a hard time mentally. But like, at the same time, there were a lot of positive things in my childhood that gave me enough confidence to know that that wasn't going to be, something. I knew I could work my way out of it eventually and do well enough for myself that I could just carry on with myself. So I think you have to look towards your strengths and what you do have for you as an individual and make that work for you. Like everyone has circumstances and everyone has, cards that they're dealt or whatever, but like you have to play to your strengths and make it work for you because you might have struggles, but you'll also have things that you can call a strength or things that, make you outstanding or shining as an individual. So you really have to remember those and emphasize those instead of letting your hardships or your circumstances that aren't as favorable, dictate how you are.
Yeah, it's truly really inspiring message and also why it's so important to, have stories like your voice, giving it a platform. So we're super grateful that, you're coming forward with this story. So, this opens up the space for more people to even recognize it in themselves and recognize that, help is there and recovery is possible and to strive towards that.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, you do have to do most of the work because it's on you to get better. You really kind of have to reinvent yourself. Like if you just stopped with the diagnosis, then you'd be stuck forever as that person. But you almost have to imagine, there's a better life out for you and you have to want it. You have to believe in it and you have to work towards it to make it more and more of a reality every day. Like and it's not like some like, red carpet experience. It's just, finding like interest in life and living it and making a life for yourself. It's no one's going to roll out a red carpet for you because you got better, but you can certainly, enjoy your life and make something of yourself instead of just saying I'm the victim to circumstances that I can't control, because I think you can work on it. It's hard work, but you really have to like envision yourself as a reinvented person. If you're going to go from someone who was hospitalized to someone who's has all their things in place and is okay. So you have to believe in that and believe in that for yourself and not let a diagnosis define you for, you have to understand that they're addressing something that's about you that is problematic, not because you're a problem in and of yourself. It's not innate, but you are exhibiting mental health symptoms. So you have to accept it, but you also can, believe that you can get better and change. So you have to work with it, and just have the right amount of optimism and determination, but also be realistic.
Mhm.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's a good point. And I know you mentioned that, other people, everyone has something different that they use in terms of coping, and that you had like strong life goals that helped move you forward. Do you think achieving those life goals and having, that extended amount of purpose, like as you said, you're working on in biotech to help treat cancer, things like that. Do you think that was a big stepping stone as well in terms of um, recognizing, as you said, that you're more than your diagnosis, you have a lot more, or life has a lot more to offer you as well.
Yeah, so I think it's important to have goals. You don't have to have huge goals, but just to have goals that keep moving you forward, that applies to anybody. But especially so with people who are struggling, and to get out of your situation, you have to, set realistic and achievable goals for yourself so that you can work towards a better life. But everyone is, in their lives and working towards a better life. So it doesn't apply just to people with mental health diagnoses, but it certainly helps to have definable goals. And what they say about, I'm not a life coach, but what they say about having like short-term goals and long-term goals. And when they ask you in a job interview, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? Like, having an idea of how to answer those questions really is helpful, because it can frame your current state and your future state, and it opens up the possibility for change and bettering yourself. And I think like young people, like, absolutely, can listen to that and apply that to themselves, because it applies to any phase of life that you're in. But for young people, especially who haven't lived life yet, knowing, having an idea of how you want to be and where you want to be is important to give you direction.
Absolutely. That's, if you have any other questions?
I guess
Yeah.
one other question I would like to ask is, you mentioned throughout like your hospitalizations, you had some good doctors and some bad doctors. I was
Yeah.
wondering if you could offer, your perspective, like from your experience as a patient, like how doctors can do better when treating patients, like whether it be more empathetic or just certain things that you felt could have been done to make your experience a lot better.
I just think having the degree is good, but to have the pedigree of a good doctor is really important, because some doctors, I just felt like they were treating you as an experiment. Like, they had no idea how to best treat you or what medication was the most appropriate for you. They just went from a list that they learned somewhere or memorized somewhere or even looked up, and they just kind of like pulled from a list. But like, I felt like the doctor that gave me the right diagnosis and the right medication, he just knew based on observation what I needed, like the most appropriate medication. So he just had experience, and bedside manner is great, but you need to have a doctor who's objective and just really knows what they're doing. There's no formula for that. You just have to encounter one and be fortunate that you've crossed paths with them and that they're treating you. But the bad doctors, I felt like, just would try all kinds of new fancy medications. And the one that I was put on, I think, has been around for over 50 years, and it's been tried and true, and it's an old medication, but it works. So, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to be accurate and just have a sharp, astute observation of the patient and make the right diagnosis and treatment. So that's, if they can do that, that's amazing. You definitely want to keep them around.
Okay, well, I think, yeah, that's all the questions that we have, right? Is there anything else that, I know we've talked more about, your journey. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you would like to bring in?
I think that's everything. I am surprised that this interview was focused so much on the diagnosis, because I'm speaking from a public place. So I don't know, I've just been talking, but I think it is important to emphasize that, but it's important to emphasize that because that's what happened and that's where it started. But again, to have the broad viewpoint of starting somewhere and ending somewhere or going somewhere more positive, and emphasizing both parts and not getting so focused on either one. You have to start somewhere, and then there's a journey. If you're, you know, doing anything for yourself, there's a journey forward and a journey towards a better life. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the diagnosis, I think one thing that was really inspiring about, you know, your journey in particular, like at least for us, was the emphasis on the journey aspect and reaching like where your position is right now in your journey. Because I think the diagnosis is the part of that journey that like, or to some people is the end all be all, and there is no journey, and it's so hard to come out of that
Mhm.
cave that you can get into. So yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Like I think it's so important that you're emphasizing that it is a multi-step process and that it takes time and that there's so many factors that are a big part of it. So
Yeah, and like a big part of that was always having some sort of belief, like not cocky belief, but just an underlying belief that I had so much more to offer than just being like a diagnosis mental patient. Like, and you know, you're both young people too. Like, you should have that belief about yourself no matter what, like that you have a lot to offer the world, you know, like speak up, be vocal, you know, be compassionate, but just be yourself and just shine. And like, it's important to make your mark on the world. And if you're diagnosed with something like that, it just makes it that much harder, but you still have something to offer. You know, you still have strengths and good points about you and good like um um good things about you that are you know, worthwhile, that people will take notice of. So just everyone should remember that they have those parts of them that will serve them well.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, like again,
Yeah.
You're
for
welcome.
Really appreciate
Yeah.
you taking the time to meet with us and share
Of
this
course.
story. And yeah, I loved how you emphasized stepping stones and looking forward to, you know, a brighter future. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, like a lot of the themes that I've talked about is important for people going through struggles, but I think this is everyone's life. Like,
Yeah.
everyone's life develops. So a lot of the themes that I talked about can be applicable to anyone, and there are some things to keep in mind there and lessons to hold in mind. So,
Mhm.
but I appreciate your time, for you taking the time to talk with me, and just giving me a small platform, but hopefully an impactful one to reach people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Good,
All
amazing.
right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you both.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Have a great
Okay.
rest of your holiday season.
You too. Take care.